Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the North East Lincolnshire series, centred around Grimsby and Cleethorpes along the Humber Estuary. North East Lincolnshire has 21 civil parishes. Here's today's for you. Welcome back to North East Lincolnshire, everybody. Now today we're in a place where a name has a lot of meaning, and that name is Stanford. There we go, Stanford. But that's not the name of this parish. Stanford means a lot to the village and the parish of Laceby. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. Laceby, on the outskirts of Grimsby, is situated along the A46 on the edge of the Lincolnshire Wolds. The name Laceby is believed to mean farmstead or village of a man called Leifr, Leifr being an Old Scandinavian personal name. There's some evidence to suggest there was a settlement here in Saxon times. Anglo-Saxon pottery was discovered in Cooper's Lane in 1969, and nearby Welbeck Hill to the west of the village is the site of an Anglo-Saxon cemetery. Roman pottery has also been found there. Laceby is synonymous with the name Stanford. In 1730, the Stanford Charity School was founded here by the Stanford Trust, set up by Sarah Stanford in accordance with her husband's will. The school originally served the parishes of Laceby, Bradley and Barnoldby le Beck. The Stanford name lives on today thanks to the current school building and the library next door. Another important local name is Pawson, a family who moved here from Louth in the 1800s. Laceby used to be on the main road between Lincoln and Grimsby, but was bypassed in the 1960s. It's become a village popular for commuters, and although it's grown over the years, it's maintained its sense of community. It once had a claim to fame too, regarding its pubs. This is Laceby, a lovely village all round. Let's go and check it out. To kick things off in Laceby, we first need to drive into the village from Grimsby. This is Cottagers Plot roundabout on the A46. Cottagers Plot is also the name of a long, narrow lane which runs to the south, on which there's the Cottagers Equestrian Centre, which is a well-known horse riding stables. Just off the roundabout there's a retail park which has a Morrison's store, its associated petrol station and a McDonald's restaurant. These are within the parish boundaries. There's also a second roundabout to the west of Laceby along the A46, still within the boundaries, which has another petrol station, a Mercedes-Benz car dealership and a few other small industrial units. It's important to note that Laceby Acres, a suburb of Grimsby which is directly adjacent to this area, is not in the parish boundaries. With not much more to tell you about this area, let's make for Laceby Village, which is far more interesting, let me tell you. Out onto the A46 now, there's Grimsby Garden Centre on the left, but the camera didn't quite pick it up. We then hit a junction where we turn right to go into Laceby. On it there's a car showroom, Marshall's, Grimsby's local BMW dealer. You might have already guessed it, but the road we're about to follow is the old main road through the village. Laceby was bypassed by the A46 in 1962. As the main road, this was a busy and often congested trunk route which linked Grimsby, Cleethorpes and the Humber Docks to Lincoln. It wasn't unheard of during the summer months for there to be queues of coaches from Yorkshire and the Midlands all heading to the sea on day trips. You can imagine how that would have been quite disruptive if you were a Laceby resident back then. These days, travelling on Grimsby Road is a much easier task. So the main walk will start and end here in an actual little car park off Cooper Lane. You don't get these very often, do you? Well, it's a good place to leave the car anyway, at least I'm not leaving it on a side street. Sometimes I do worry about that, you know, leaving my car on a side street. Just how it is. A little car park like this should be fine. So let's go. There's lots to talk about here in Laceby. Let's see what there is. We start in a small park between Cooper's Lane and St Francis Grove. This area of land used to be a sand and gravel pit many years ago, which was used by the local builders. Known as the Pit, it was worked out in 1950 and started to fill with water. In 1951 though, permission was granted for it to be used as a tip for a factory based on the Humber Bank. This was covered with soil in the 1970s and some of the surface has since subsided, giving it its earthwork-like appearance. The path through the park runs to St Francis Grove, one of Laceby's many housing estates. As you enter this street, you pass this large playground. The streets we're now about to walk through are typical of Laceby's eastern end, post-war properties which are occupied mainly by working families. Laceby has become a popular place for commuters working both in Grimsby and in the industrial areas along the Humber Bank, and the houses just keep on coming. So this eastern area of Laceby is very typical of the village as a whole. It's a very well populated settlement and it's still growing. We'll see a bit later around the route. There are more houses which have been built very recently and it continues to grow. It's one of those settlements on the outskirts of Grimsby which is great for commuters. So now we're heading into the village centre. I'm on Kenmare Road or Avenue, can't remember which one it is. This runs to Caister Road. We'll take a left at the end and that will take us into the village centre. We're now on Caister Road where we find a row of shops. Laceby has more than this, but here there's an off-licence, a hairdresser's and a beauty salon. We're heading for what's known as Pawson's Corner, named after Charles Pawson, a wheelwright who brought his family to Laceby in 1849 from Louth. The Pawson family lived in a small house which stood close to this corner. It's now been demolished, but this board shows you what it used to look like. On the opposite side of the road was a farm owned by Walter Allison, which was used for the storage of scrap metal during World War II to help with the war effort. Around the corner we find an old primitive Methodist chapel. This was built in 1877 and replaced a previous chapel from 1837. There's more old chapels to come yet. And just before we get to the centre of the village there's a second shop. This houses the current post office. I'll show you where an old one was shortly. There's a few interesting buildings around here. Check this out. These two little cottages, one of which has got a garage on the side of it. That's at number 1 Caister Road. There's someone behind me, I better move out of the way. The first thing of note in the village centre is a bus stop. Laceby is served by one bus, the 250 service, which runs between Cleethorpes and Barton. Next to this there's a church hall, which is where the local preschool is based. Outside there's a date stone from Laceby's former Sunday school, dated 1821. There's some more shops and takeaway outlets in the centre as well, including this pizza house. It has no pubs, but it once had 2. The tall building in this shot was the Waterloo Inn, and right next door was the Nag's Head. They were noted in the Guinness Book of Records as the 2 closest pubs in England. They were combined into one pub in 1990. On the corner of Church Lane is a local cafe called the Laceby Teapot, and overlooking all of this is Laceby's Church, which holds an annual garden party. Dedicated to St Margaret of Antioch, this is a Grade 1 listed building. Now, we will be back to the church later. I'm not going to touch on it just yet because my route later takes me down that road there, and I want to talk about this building. So for now, we're going that way. We'll see the church again later. This next section takes us to the end of Church Lane. At the end of it is Austin Garth, a tree-covered area that lines Laceby Beck, a local stream. A short path then links us to Old Chapel Lane. We've got another 2 chapels to see in this area, but first there's Laceby's Royal British Legion Club. This is located on a street called Austin Garth, and the building it occupies is known as Bainbridge Hall. With no pubs here, this is the only place for a pint in Laceby. Now we're on New Chapel Lane. This building is a former Wesleyan chapel dating from 1810. This was replaced with a second building in 1853 on the corner of the High Street, and this is it. There was a further chapel in Laceby, close to the parish boundary with Irby upon Humber. Despite being in Laceby, it was called Irby Chapel. We're now on the High Street. I was loving these tall white houses, by the way. What we've done here is effectively complete a circuit of the church. And there's another little local shop around here as well. That's that one there, called Glenn's, according to the sign. And now we're heading for the church, which is just to the left up here. St Margaret's Church is in the Laceby and Ravendale group of churches in the deanery of Haverstow and the Diocese of Lincoln. Parts of it date from the 12th century. It's built from Ancaster stone in both Early English and Perpendicular styles, consisting of a chancel, nave, west porch, and an embattled tower with pinnacles and 4 bells. During restoration works in the late 1800s, grave covers dating to the 10th or early 11th century were incorporated into the church's interior. A small blocked-up Norman-era window was also found on the east side of the porch. This was restored and stained glass depicting St Margaret was installed. The parish register here dates from 1538, and it's notable because one entry within it relates to the execution of a witch in 1546. In 1583, the Bishop of Worcester, John Whitgift, who was born in Grimsby, was appointed Archbishop of Canterbury by Queen Elizabeth I. He was a former rector at this very church. This is interesting. I've never noticed this before in any church I've ever been to in Lincolnshire. But according to this board here, there's something called the Lincolnshire Churches Cascade. Throughout the historic county of Lincolnshire, you will find the Cascade logo on wall panels and on free literature offering inspired guidance on churches to visit in the historic county of Lincolnshire. And that apparently is the Cascade logo. I've never seen that anywhere. I'm going to look for that from now on. Now you might have noticed that there's no graves here outside the church, nothing in the churchyard, and that's because this church has its own separate cemetery, and to get to that we need to head down this road here. But before we do, I need to talk about that building, like I said earlier. Built in 1872, this building used to be a temperance hall, but it's now a community centre. I reckon it was a police station too at one point because of the sign on its wall. The building on the other side of the road is Laceby Barbers, but this used to be a post office. It's commemorated by this plaque on its wall, which marked its 150th anniversary. Walking between those two buildings will take you down to Laceby Cemetery, formed in 1875 on a 1.5 acre plot of land. The cemetery is the location of the War Memorial, which commemorates the 58 men who served in the wars, 42 of which never returned. After walking through another housing estate, we're at a primary school. This is Stanford Junior and Infant School, which was founded in 1730 by the Stanford Trust. The trust was set up by Sarah Stanford in accordance with her husband Philip Stanford's will. Next door there's the village library, which also bears the Stanford name. Okay, so now we've turned up Gibraltar Lane, and this will take us to the northernmost section of the village. I've just seen something there. What's this? This wall is built 6 inches within the extent, 1846. I have no idea what that means. I'm sure architects out there might well know, but I definitely don't. It's interesting anyway. It's got a date on it. I always like seeing dates. They're very helpful. So anyway, as I was saying, we're on Gibraltar Lane and we are walking up to the northernmost part of the village now. This will catch the playing fields, the sports area, and then we're going to come back through a residential area and back to that little car park. Another housing estate brings us to Butt Lane. This is the road on which you'll find the allotments I was speaking about in the Aylesby episode. It's also the location of Butt Lane playing fields, which boast a multi-use games area and a fully equipped play area for younger children. It's a popular location within the village, and it's also the base for the local football team, Laceby FC, who were founded in 2019. Laceby FC have several teams, including a full junior setup, but their main one compete in the Grimsby, Cleethorpes and District Sunday Football League. There's a bowling green here too, but as you can see, this one is very much no longer in use. It's overgrown and seemingly abandoned now. It's a bit of a shame to see, actually. Lastly, we take a walk over the adjoining fields via a footpath, and over in the distance you can see where Laceby's newest properties are all being built. Alright, we are nearly all the way around. You guys are in need now of a special section, and for today's special section I've reserved Laceby Manor and the golf club, which is out towards the southwest of Laceby. So here's a bit about that. In 1834, the village had 2 principal residences, Laceby Hall, which was occupied by the Oxendens, and Laceby Manor, occupied by the Skipworths. These days, the manor is owned by former Grand Prix driver Roger Burnett, and is a luxury hotel, gym and spa resort covering some 150 acres of the Lincolnshire Wolds. It's also got a restaurant with a seasonal menu, and it's a popular wedding venue as well. Laceby Manor also has an award-winning 18-hole golf course. The golf course was originally farmland, which was transformed in the 1990s. It's now matured into one of the area's top courses, considered challenging for all golfers. And right next door to all of this is the Willows, a small friendly camping and caravanning site with 30 pitches, which has its own private lake for fishing. And while we're on the subject of accommodation, just up the road is Oakland's Hall Hotel, a former Victorian country house which offers some 46 rooms. just like that, we're back to the car park where I began. That took me an hour and 20 minutes to take in the village and the parish of Laceby, and I do hope you've enjoyed it. It's time for me to move on to my next one. The weather is still good, there's not a cloud in the sky, so hopefully it stays that way for the next episode. I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.